It was a chilly and wet November night in the Detroit suburb of Dearborn Heights, Michigan. 54-year-old homeowner Ted Wafer was awoken from his sleep at 4:30 a.m. by loud banging and shouting at his doorway. First, the noise came from the side of the house, then from the front door. The small house seemed to be surrounded, and he thought it was under attack. Someone or multiple people were attempting to break in. As the disturbance escalated, Ted reached for the tool that he had purchased for exactly this purpose: his shotgun. Holding the gun with one hand and opening the front door with the other, he fired. On the other end of the barrel was not a band of thieves or violent attackers. It was just a 19-year-old girl, and she was alone. The call came in at 4:30 a.m. from Dearborn Heights resident Theodore, Ted Wafer. He told the dispatcher he had shot someone with a shotgun who was banging on his door. The dispatcher called out emergency services. They arrived within 2 minutes of the call placed by Ted. Upon their arrival, they reported finding a young woman already passed away, collapsed on Ted's front porch. The dispatcher tried to gather more information, asking if Ted knew the person he shot. They attempted to call him back for more details. Emergency responders confirmed there was a person down on the porch, a black female. The young woman was later identified as 19-year-old Renisha McBride. She was a stranger to Ted. It was unclear what had brought her to his door in the early morning hours. By Ted's own admission, he had fired the shot that killed her. Law enforcement took statements from Ted that morning. The first was at the scene when they arrived and was captured by audio recording. The second took place at the police station several hours later. Ted explained that he lived alone in the house. Ted's shotgun, a Mossberg 12-gauge with a pistol grip handle, was left on the floor of the hallway inside the front door. He had fired a single but deadly shot. Ted Wafer was 52 years old. He was unmarried and had no children. He was alone in the house when the shooting took place. There was one shell casing left in the shotgun. Additional ammunition was found in the house, tucked away in a bedroom closet. The cover for the gun was located in a different bedroom from where the ammunition was kept. Based upon this assessment, it seemed that Ted had moved around the house preparing the weapon before using it. Investigators found the main door had been opened by Ted prior to firing the shot. The second external screen door, however, remained closed. The fatal bullet had been fired through it. The screen door had been locked. The autopsy revealed that Renisha McBride died of the shot to the head. She had also sustained a separate head injury. A blood toxicology determined the presence of alcohol. Renisha had been intoxicated. There were also traces of marijuana in her system. When Ted was brought into the station for formal questioning, he did not appear to be under the influence of any drugs or alcohol. However, he was not, according to reports, given a toxicology screen at the station. Ted reiterated what he had told law enforcement at his home earlier that morning. He awoke to noises, pounding on his doors. Ted claimed that his car had recently been vandalized. He said that his house had been hit a few weeks earlier with paintballs. Laying the foundation for a later formal defense of his actions, Ted had noted these incidents, which formed a pattern of escalating damage to his property, though none of these incidents were reported to the police when they occurred. He described hearing noises that startled him. He didn't know what the noises were, but they sounded like banging and prying noises. First they came from the side of the house, then bounced back to the side of the house. At this point, he became frightened. His heart was racing. He had no idea what was happening. The sounds were getting louder, and he thought at any time something was coming through the door. It was getting violent. Despite what Ted characterized as a frightening and violent encounter, he nonetheless claimed to have fired the weapon accidentally. He did not even know that the gun was loaded, a claim that investigators found to be understandably suspicious. A ballistics expert later analyzed the gun and found absolutely nothing wrong with it. If the gun fired, it was because Ted Wafer's finger pulled the trigger. When asked about the single shell casing, Ted tried to explain. He said there was just one in the gun all the time. He couldn't remember if there was one in it or not. He kept his shells in a separate closet. He said he got a little paranoid a few weeks back when his house got paintballed. Maybe that was when he loaded it and put one in. He didn't think he had mentioned that before, but that might have been when he put one in there. However, he insisted he did not realize there was one in there. Renisha McBride was a cheerful teenager. According to friends and family, she was a very sweet young woman and extremely outgoing. She was quick to offer a word of advice and tried to cheer up those around her. One of Renisha's aunts described how she loved to sing and was constantly cracking jokes. On the evening of November 2, 2013, the 19-year-old was hanging out with her best friend Amber Jenkins. There was not much to do at the McBride household, so the girls decided to play a drinking game. They purchased a bottle of vodka, and over the next hour and a half the young women took shots. Exactly how many were consumed is not clear, but when the game was over, half the bottle was gone and Renisha, according to Amber, was undoubtedly declared the loser. Amber then left the house, but for Renisha, it was not the end of the night. Monica McBride, Renisha's mother, was also at home that evening. After Amber left, the mother and daughter had an argument. Renisha had not been keeping up with chores around the house, and Monica was not letting it go this time. The argument was not necessarily a new one. Renisha was a well-loved daughter, and her father was known to spoil her. Cousins later recounted affectionately that whatever Nisha wanted, Nisha got. In this respect, she had been a good kid and a typical teenager. On that Saturday night, unaware that Renisha had been drinking, the disagreement with her mother came to an end when the teenager got into her car and drove from the house. It was the last time that Monica McBride would see her daughter alive. A short time later, at approximately 1 a.m., witnesses in the neighborhood of Dearborn Heights watched as Renisha's white Ford Taurus drove rapidly through the house-lined residential street, made an abrupt swerve toward the side of the road, and crashed head-on into a parked car. Thankfully, there were no occupants in the parked vehicle. When Renisha emerged from her car, she was visibly bleeding from the head. A break in the glass of the front windshield was likely where her head had made impact with it, though the incident reportedly occurred far too rapidly for onlookers to know for sure. The teenager exited the car and wandered away from the crash site multiple times, only to then return to her vehicle. One witness recounted that she appeared to be in shock. Another said she was disoriented and likely intoxicated. Calls were placed to emergency services. Renisha could not be convinced to wait for the response by EMTs, despite the pleas from those at the scene. She wandered off a third or fourth time, but on that last occasion, she did not return. By the time responders arrived, they were told that they were likely to locate the disoriented driver by circling the block. It is unclear if they ever attempted to do so. For the next 3 hours, Renisha's whereabouts remained unaccounted for. Her family believed that she was wandering the streets, confused, seeking help to return home. At some time after 4 a.m., she arrived at the home of Ted Wafer, 2.5 miles from where she had crashed her car. Ted's house looked very similar to her own. The same style of windows, a similar door, and a common-looking roof. Before leaving the crash site, Renisha was overheard stating repeatedly that she just wanted to go home. Renisha's family and community members expressed their frustration and grief. They felt that Ted was in his house and did not have to open the door. He could have called 911 to protect himself, and if Renisha was seeking help, he could have called 911 to get her help. They did not think the shooting was justifiable, and they did not think it was accidental. In the days following Renisha's death, anger and confusion began to mount over the lack of action being undertaken by the Dearborn police. Ted Wafer's name had not been released to the public, but it was known that the shooter had been released without charges. It was difficult at the time to avoid viewing Renisha's death outside the context of other unjust killings that were also sparking protests and media outrage across the country. Protests calling for justice in Renisha's case took place while the details about what had occurred that night were only beginning to hit the media. Family members demanded answers. They questioned why the shooter was still at home instead of being locked up on charges of murder or manslaughter. They wanted justice for Renisha. They wanted the man who took their niece's life locked up. They needed him to know what he did. He took the life of their 19-year-old niece, who was no longer with them. They could not even look at her. Pressure was building on Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy to bring charges. Eventually, she announced that the evidence in the case led them to conclude that the defendant did not act in lawful self-defense. She explained that lawful self-defense must have an honest and reasonable, not honest or reasonable, but honest and reasonable belief of imminent death or imminent great bodily harm to himself or another person. The use of force must be necessary to prevent that imminent death or great bodily harm. She stated that they did not believe Ted Wafer acted in lawful self-defense. Ted Wafer was charged on 3 counts: second-degree murder, manslaughter, and a felony firearms charge. He was released on a $25,000 bond, awaiting trial, which was set to commence in July 2014.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
The prosecution laid out their case. They acknowledged that everyone knew Renisha had been in a car accident and sustained an injury. Her face was bleeding. She was dazed and ended up a couple of hours later on the porch of Ted Wafer. They knew that her blood alcohol showed that she was intoxicated. She may have been boisterous, loud, or noisy. However, there was no evidence that she attempted to break into Wafer's house. None whatsoever. As the trial date approached, Ted Wafer changed his story. He no longer claimed that he was uncertain if the gun was loaded and that he shot accidentally. He now claimed that he fired the weapon purposefully but in self-defense. He feared for his life. The prosecution argued that Renisha just wanted to go home. On November 2, 2013, she was injured, disoriented, and just wanted to go home. They described how Ted Wafer released the safety, raised the gun, pulled the trigger, and blew her face off. The state prosecution argued that Ted Wafer wanted a confrontation when he shot and killed Renisha. They pointed to previous statements made by Ted that he took the shotgun while mad, angry, and full of piss and vinegar to find out what was going on. Defense attorney Cheryl Carpenter said the prosecution left out the fact that the jury could not find Ted Wafer guilty of murder if the shooting was justified. She said her client was in fear for his life. She argued that Ted Wafer looked like somebody who was out of his mind with anger that night, but afterward, he looked like a man who was confused. She said the jury heard he was a man in fear for his life. He believed they were coming at him. He said multiple times that they were coming at him. She asked the jury to get into Ted's mindset, what was going through his heart and head. She emphasized that he believed they were coming to get him. She pointed out that he shot through a locked door and questioned whether such a door would keep anybody out. Dr. Werner Spitz, a forensic pathologist called by the defense, testified that he believed Renisha McBride had a concussion from the car crash. He added that her blood alcohol level would have caused her to experience a loss of judgment. The doctor also noticed an apparent laceration on Renisha's hand. He told the jury that she may have injured it from pounding on Ted Wafer's door. This evidence seemed to contradict that of the medical examiner, who said he did not observe anything out of the ordinary on Renisha's hand during the autopsy. The testimony pointing to her repeatedly hitting the door was significant. Beyond these statements, there was only Ted's word that Renisha had been violently knocking on his door at all. There was also the hole in the screen door. The defense argued that this could have been created by Renisha attempting to break in. Ted told police that at the point he opened the front door, he noticed that the screen door had been tampered with. Law enforcement conversely testified that they assumed the damage to the screen door was created by the shotgun blast and would have been intact before Ted fired. However, there was no way to be certain that the tear in the screen had not been created prior to this, perhaps as part of an attempt to enter the house. Ted Wafer took the stand in his own defense. His demeanor was calm, even sorrowful. Court reporters later recounted that his emotional testimony brought at least one juror to tears. Ted told the jury that he heard pounding and first looked for his cell phone but could not find it. He found a baseball bat, then there was more pounding on the door. He determined that the bat was not enough to defend himself. He was both angry and panicked when he picked up his shotgun. When asked if he thought they wanted to hurt him at that moment, and if he thought they were about to get into his house, Ted described how he could feel the floor vibrating and the windows rattling. He wanted to find out what was going on. He wanted to investigate. He was not going to cower in his house. He did not want to be a victim. He explained that he opened the door all the way, as much as he could, and as soon as he did, a person came out from the side of his house so fast. He raised the gun in defense. Ted characterized the shooting as an extremely unfortunate accident. He was remorseful, but his actions, he said, were justified. He called it a reaction, a self-defense reaction to protect himself. That was how he felt about it. Not that night specifically, but he felt he had to do it to protect himself. He questioned whether any of this would have happened if EMS had showed up for Renisha in the first place. He asked why she or they picked his house. He said he did not know why this was brought to him. He did not go out looking for this. The trial lasted 9 days. The jury took less than 2 days deliberating before returning their verdict. Guilty on all 3 counts of murder in the second degree. Despite Ted's impactful and ostensibly genuine testimony, legal analysts later suggested that the inconsistencies in his story to law enforcement were what led to his conviction. Ted remained largely emotionless throughout the trial and the reading of the verdict. Upon sentencing, he spoke directly to Renisha McBride's loved ones. He apologized from the bottom of his heart. He said he was truly sorry for their loss. Ted was 55 years old at the time of his sentencing. His lawyer, Cheryl Carpenter, said at the hearing that anything more than 10 years in prison would be a life sentence. Ted was given 17 years. Reactions to the sentence were mixed. Some felt that knowing Ted had to do 17 years in prison was like a death sentence and really unfair. Others, particularly Renisha's family, felt differently. They believed 17 years was not enough. He should have gotten life. He would get out and be able to still live at 72. Their niece would never even see 21. Ted appealed the convictions, arguing that he should not have been sentenced for both second-degree murder and statutory involuntary manslaughter for the same crime. He claimed this violated the double jeopardy clause because one crime requires the element of malice and the other is applied when malice is not present. The court agreed with this assessment. He could not be convicted on both charges. While serving his 17-year term, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled to overturn the manslaughter conviction. The decision meant that Ted would be resentenced for the remaining 2 charges. At the resentencing hearing, Ted Wafer again reiterated his regret and remorse for his actions. He stated that from his fear, he caused the loss of a life that was too young to leave this world, and for that, he would carry that guilt and sorrow forever. Wayne County Judge Dana Hathaway said the prison sentence would not change. 15 years for second-degree murder plus 2 years for using a gun during a crime, which Ted Wafer had by that point already served. Judge Hathaway then explained her logic, summarized in a simple statement. You cannot murder someone for simply knocking on your door in the middle of the night. You had choices. Ted will be eligible for parole in 2031. This was the tragic case of Renisha McBride and the conviction of Theodore Wafer. A story of a young woman seeking help who knocked on the wrong door, and a man who chose to open that door with a loaded gun instead of calling for help. Every crime leaves a trace, and we're here to follow them. Subscribe for more real, haunting stories you won't forget.